There are 3 openings yet. I now call the June 2021 meeting of the New Ulm Human Rights Commission to order. We'll begin with our first order of business. We are going to suspend the agenda until later and go directly to our presentation. Before we go to the presentation, just a few comments. First of all, a recent letter to the editor suggested that the Human Rights Commission was partisan. By law, the Human Rights Commission as a body is nonpartisan. It does not endorse political candidates nor policy. What individuals of the Commission think or do independently has no impact on the Human Rights Commission's nonpartisanship status. The purpose of the Human Rights Commission of New Ulm is to secure for all individuals equal opportunity to employment, housing, public accommodations, public service, and education, and to secure full participation in the affairs of this community by assisting the State Department of Human Rights and by advising the city on long-range programs to involve human relations in the city. Secondly, to enlist the cooperation of agencies, organizations, and individuals in the community in an active program directed to create equal opportunity and eliminate discrimination and inequalities. The City Code recognizes the Commission's leadership in recognizing and resolving potential human rights violations in the community. Hence, our purpose for providing a briefing on critical race theory as a potentially divisive issue in our community stems from the stated purpose of the Human Rights Commission. To be reminded, this meeting is not a public hearing, nor is it a public debate. This is a regular meeting of the New Ulm Human Rights Commission. The public has been attended to attend the briefing. We understand that there are strong opinions on both sides of this issue. However, we expect the discourse this evening to be civil and that everyone's opinion be respected, irrespective of whether we agree with others' opinions. Our presenter has noted he is willing to answer questions tonight. We ask that we wait till the end of his presentation, and in the interest of everyone's time, we are limiting questions to a 2-minute time limit. When you do ask a question, please proceed to the podium. Their speaker will cede the podium, and introduce yourselves as you ask the question. That's pro forma for all city commissions. With that, we'd like to move to our presentation tonight. Dr. Andrew Johnson is a professor of education and distinguished faculty scholar at Minnesota State University, Mankato. He specializes in literacy instruction and RTI for reading and writing, strategies for the inclusive classroom, and advanced pedagogy. After teaching in the classroom for 9 years, he earned his PhD from the University of Minnesota in literacy instruction. He is the author of 14 books and numerous book chapters and academic articles related to literacy, learning, and the human condition. He is also the host of the podcast, The Reading Instruction Show, which can be found at https://rss.com/podcasts/Dr. Andy. With that, we'd like to welcome Dr. Andrew Johnson.
Thanks for inviting me. Always happy to talk. Hopefully I can just clarify some things related to critical race theory. 2 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to talk about this, but I think a lot of us were moved by the events of last summer, and it invited me to see what the heck this thing is about. So let's see if I can maybe present some clarity to what critical race theory is and is not. So let's start with what it is not, clear up some ideas. It has nothing to do with communism or socialism or Marxism whatsoever. The word equity is sometimes used to link it to Marxism. And that's a bit of a stretch. Equity in this sense.
Dr. Des, could you, make sure you get that closer to your speaking.
Okay, how's that?
That's better.
All right.
Thank you.
Equity here refers to fairness and justice and not equal outcomes. So those words, communism and socialism and Marxism, are sometimes used as buzzwords to scare people, very much like what occurred in the 50s. It does not teach children to hate white people. It just doesn't. I've done a thorough review of this, and I could find nothing related to hating white people or Marxism. It does not teach children to be ashamed of being white. It just doesn't. I found nothing related to that. And it does not promote the idea that America is bad. Far from it. It doesn't teach people to hate George Washington. It just doesn't. Saying so doesn't make it so. Now, a common criticism is there's no research to support this theory. Well, have you looked? Have you done a review of the literature? There is more research to support this theory than almost anything else. Just in my area of education, just very briefly, just some of the research to support systemic racism, to show that it exists. So what is it? It is a theory, and let's look at what a theory is. A theory is not a disproven assumption in the way it's used in the social sciences. A theory is a way to explain a set of facts. It creates a dot-to-dot with these data dots. In my field of education, we have behavioral learning theory and cognitive learning theory. These are all different theories that explain learning a little bit differently. They connect different data dots differently. So a theory is a way to explain a set of facts. And critical race theory connects a lot of data dots related to systemic racism. All right? And these are uncomfortable but necessary conversations to have right now. It originated in the 70s. It came out of legal studies by Derek Bell, Alan Friedman, Richard Delgado. They were concerned with the slow pace of progress and reform on racism. It started in the 60s, had a lot of momentum, but things started to slow down in the 70s. The protests, the marches produced smaller and fewer gains. In the 90s, Gloria Ladson-Billing is one of the early scholars that took this lens, this way of looking at things, and brought it into the education realm. It creates a lens through which we view the different systems in our society. The legal system, political system, economic system, prison systems. It looks at all these different systems, and it asks these uncomfortable questions. When looking at these things, who gains? Who's exploited? Who gets the resources? Who is advantaged? How are marginalized populations depicted? Whose voice dominates? Whose is silenced? Who's included and excluded? Who gets the opportunities? Who gets the attention? Who's making money? What makes it difficult for some and easier for others? These are the questions we use to look at our different systems. And I ask myself, who doesn't want us asking these questions? So 7 big ideas that I've taken for my review, looking for commonalities as I review the literature on critical race theory. And this is a very good book if you want to understand critical race theory, Richard Delgado and Gene Stefanik. But the first big idea is racism is normal. It's so ingrained in our consciousness that we don't even see it anymore. It's subtle. Now, we may not see it, but our brains see it in the form of implicit bias. And the research on implicit bias is incredibly strong. How people react when they see a black person versus a white person, incredibly strong. We may not see racism, but our policies do, our procedures do, our laws do, our systems do. We may not see it, but just because we don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Remember, as a white person, first time a person of color said they felt uncomfortable living in Mankato, I said, what? What? This is Mankato? I realized, oh, I'm a white guy. I'm a white guy. I don't know. I can never know the experience of being a person of color. The looks, the side glances, the feelings. I remember I was out walking my dog with my wife. A police car came and stopped right by us. And I thought, oh my gosh, if I was a person of color, I would interpret that event totally different. Turns out he lived there and he was waiting for us to turn into the driveway. But that's the lens, different in how we view reality. For change to occur, we must unmask and expose racism if we're going to have change. Now, here's the thing. At some point in human history, racism is going to end. Whether it's in 5 years, 500 years, 5 millennia, it's going to end. So why don't we get through it sooner rather than later so we don't have to go through all the pain and misery? Here's a definition of systemic racism. It has to do with systems, political, economic, legal, judicial, educational, and includes the policies, procedures, rules, laws, regulations, traditions, institutions, the paradigms, the way of viewing reality that disadvantage people of color while providing advantage to the white privileged majority in terms of opportunities and resources. That's what systemic racism is. That's one definition. The second big idea, change only occurs when it intersects with the interests of those in power. For people of color, change only occurs when it coincides with the economic and the political interests of the 1% to 5% in power. As an example, the Washington Redskins, The owner, Daniel Snyder, said never, ever will he change that logo. It's going to be there. But when the sponsors began pulling their ads, all of a sudden he had an epiphany. The scales fell from his eyes. And all of a sudden, he decided to change the name because it coincided with his economic interest. And the same with the NBA. If you remember last summer, Milwaukee Bucks said, we're not playing. Whoops, the NBA said, millions of dollars. I think we better give this thing a little bit more attention. Change will only occur when it coincides with the political and economic interests of those in power. That's idea number 2. Idea number 3, race is a social construct. It has no basis in biology. We are 99.99% genetically similar. It's an arbitrary category based on physical appearances, based on the white norm, that we have decided this group goes here and that group goes there. It's a sorting mechanism to sort people, and it has both material and psychological impacts. But race is a social construct. No person has a single identity. This idea of intersectionality, gender, ability, sexual orientation, people belong to various groups. They're not just a white person or a black person. This intersectionality, by understanding one marginalized group, it helps you understand other marginalized groups. But no person has a single identity. All people in a category do not think and act the same. Physical characteristics is not indicative of a deeper underlying commonality. Whoops, there you go. We should not ask one black person to speak for all of black people, just like I cannot speak for all little bald people. We all have different views on things. And here's where it gets a little uncomfortable. And the voice and experiences of real people must be heard and honored. It's called understanding. Understanding the perceptions, experiences of real people is essential in making progress. And there are 2 ways we sometimes silence, doggone it, silence people. Numbers without context. In education, I see this a lot. There I go again. In education, I see this a lot. Quantitative research, 39% of this, 62% of that, 7th percentile. Okay, those are numbers, but that doesn't produce understanding. Numbers are important, but without context, they provide a distorted view of reality. So that's one of the ways that the voice of people is muted and muzzled. The second is disremembering or misremembering history. And this is where it gets a little uncomfortable. Disallowing the voices of marginalized people in education through the McGraw-Hill version of U.S. history. This is what I grew up with. History is described only through the lens of the privileged majority. The history of the marginalized people is not told. History from other than a white Eurocentric perspective provides a far different view of things. An indigenous people's history of the United States presents a much different view of history than the one that I grew up with in the 60s and 70s. History of than African American and Latinx history of the United States presents a different view of history. Books like these describe a decidedly different version of U.S. history. Now, pictures like this are difficult because we know they're true. Pictures like this are difficult to look at because we know they're true. Now, this does not say that America is bad or white people should be ashamed. Absolutely not. It simply says we need to fully remember all of American history, not just part of it. And it recognizes the good things that our country has done. But by looking at all things, this is how we continue to grow and evolve. And of course, we present things that's developmentally appropriate. And I use the analogy. If your family had problems, you wouldn't ignore it and look at just the good things. If you loved your family, you would look at the problems and you would do what you can to solve those problems. And for me, if I love my country, I'm not going to ignore the problems. I want it to get better. So I'm going to do what I can to try to fix the problems that I see. One is systemic racism. And of course, things we present must be developmentally appropriate. We would not show pictures like this to elementary kids. Developmentally appropriate. And the last idea, cultural superiority and there I go again, mythological norm are factors in maintaining systemic racism. A belief that one's culture is the correct culture and everything is judged by how closely it matches our culture. The practices, lifestyles, traditional views that do not align with the dominant white culture are seen to be defective or deviant or inferior. They should be like us. They should have our values, our views of things. This does not say that white people are bad or white culture is bad. It just says that it should not be the norm to which all others are evaluated. Fallacy that there's a standardized way that things should be. They should be like us. If only they were like us, all their problems would go away. If they would just assimilate, everything would be just right. Our values are the right values that everyone should have. Our values are very important to us. Now, this does not say that white people are bad or that white culture is bad. Rather, it should not be the norm to which all others are evaluated. Here are just some of the sources that I used in looking at trying to come to understand this. And here are the 7 big ideas. And with that, I yield the floor.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Johnson. What we'll do is we'll...
Can I ask a question first? Is that okay?
Go ahead, Jackie.
Can you give us some examples of what you mean by the white norm and implicit bias?
I can tell you what implicit bias is. In the research, this is the research, it's in the research, they've done this with millions of people. They'll show black faces and white faces, and they'll measure response times and how quickly you can respond to one or other, or how strongly you react to one or other. And that's indication of an implicit bias towards one or the other. And they found that both with white people and black people, we all have implicit biases. And implicit biases towards all things, not just race, but ability. And that would be implicit bias. You react. In the classroom, and there's a disproportionality in people of color in special ed programs. Okay, well, who makes the initial referral to special ed? It's a classroom teacher. So if you're viewing the world through this is right, they're not acting the way they should be based on my experience, that would be an example of implicit bias. And white cultural superiority, was that, what was the?
White norm.
White norm. The white norm is simply saying our way is normal. It could be the black norm or whatever norm, but it's simply saying our way is the way things should be. This is normal. If you're not this, you're abnormal.
Thank you.
We will now be able to entertain any questions. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Johnson from the audience? Would you please come forward to the microphone, Dr. Vogel?
Hi, my name is Ann Vogel. I live in New Ulm, Minnesota, and I want to ask you, when you come to a community this size, have you seen this kind of an audience in this amount of numbers? I'm curious to know.
This is the first time outside my classroom I presented anything like this. Quite honestly, I'm from a very small community, smaller than this, rural Wisconsin. So I'm very used to this. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, this is a pretty big turnout.
Yes, well, I don't know what's big or small, but
For New Ulm.
They're out in the hallway, we can't even, we need a TV out there.
I'd like to think it's based on my personality, but I don't.
That's bias.
I would have a question, but it's a little difficult to get up there.
Okay, please identify yourself and speak loudly then.
From here,
Sure, that'd be fine.
it's Earl LaPlante from New Ulm. I just have a question for the doctor. One comment that he made about the Washington Redskins, I've always looked at that as an honor for the American Indian to have a team named after them. So could you describe that feeling a little bit more for me?
Well, I'm not going to speak for Native Americans, but they have said that it is insulting, and they would prefer that name not to be used. So,
So can I add on a little bit? How about the city of Sleepy Eye then? That was named after an Indian.
Mr. LaPlante, I do believe the Redskins is kind of considered a derogatory term for Native Americans. And so that's why they have a problem with it. And I don't think there's a problem with Sleepy Eye because of that same reason.
People don't actually have red skin.
Yeah.
That's where we may have a little trouble understanding that, because, you know, I'm white. I just kind of lost my train of thought here where I was going to go with that. But, you know, they call that red as derogatory. We're white, other people are black. It just happened to be that way, so I don't know how that's derogatory, because we live with that. That's just my opinion.
There's another question right here. Yeah.
I kind of have a response to that.
Could you identify yourself, please? Yeah.
Barb Janke.
Okay.
I live here in New Ulm. I'm not here to argue or whatever, but nobody calls you white skin. Nobody calls us white skin. And that would be derogatory to us if we were known as the white skins. That's just how I view it, and I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Any questions from out in the hall which we can't see? Or, okay, you're welcome to. Yes, go ahead. Please identify yourself.
Risdal from New Ulm here. About 2 years ago, I went to a conference at the Ark Encounter, which is down in Kentucky, the border between Kentucky and Ohio. And I went to a conference that helped us see that we're all in the same race. We're just different shades of brown. If I hold this piece of paper up, none of us in here is a white skin. And nobody in here is black, or anywhere on earth is black. And I think until we get to the point where we can see each other in the same family, Mr. Johnson and Professor Johnson said this is going to come to an end someday. It's never going to come to an end, because people hate people for many reasons, and they will use whatever reason they can come up with. It doesn't have to be skin color, but let's take the skin color away, because we are all different shades of brown in here. So until we see each other that way, and especially if we're going to tell the children in the classes that you're oppressed because you happen to be a lighter color. Manuel, whatever his name is, that just did the In the Heights, he got in trouble because he picked people from Puerto Rico that had too light of skin color. We have to get away from this. We have to decide that we can reach that point where we can see that we're all in the same family and we're hurting our brothers.
Is there a question here,
Sorry.
Mr. Isdell? Okay.
I just wanted to make that comment.
Okay, thank you. Would you please stand, please, and speak louder?
Agree with her. To me, all this emphasis on different color is causing more racism than there was to begin with. I think like us against them, only it's kind of reversed now, and I think it's so pointed now, where if we would just learn more, kids would learn more about respect, empathy, instead of pointing out.
Are there any other, you know, comment on that, Dr. Johnson?
Of course, we're white, and one of the ideas that people say, well, I don't see color. And how can you not see color when that's a part of who a person is? It's like when I was dating, if I would say I don't see gender, my wife wouldn't like that very much. But that's a part of who they are. That's part of their background. That's part of their history.
Are we allowing questions or comments to? I have a question, but it can wait. Go ahead.
Go ahead. You have a 2-minute time limit.
So I just wanted to say that, although, my name's Beatrice Smith. Sage is turning. Okay. While I agree on many levels that I think seeing no color, I think it equates to if you're religious, we're all children of God, and if you want to look at it, as far as what our Constitution says, is that we are all created equal. That is something sacred. I think that's amazing and wonderful. But the reality is that many of us who are people of color and our ancestors in this country haven't had that reality. It has not been a reality in this country. And so, as far as seeing no color, children are recognizing in color from a very young age. My daughter was 6 years old, and I don't know what happened, but she, my husband's and grandparents. Anyway, but she looks white, and she told me one morning, black people. It just out of nowhere. I don't know. She had an experience on the playground. I don't know what happened. She told me that. As a parent, okay, she's already making judgments based on skin color, and my job as a parent to help her see the world in a broader sense. Have good experience.
Kristen?
I just had a question. So could you just speak a little bit more to, I know concerns I've heard brought up are, well, we're not going to teach some of this history and they're going to teach other history and kind of make people feel like it's this group against that group. Can you just kind of speak to the kind of things that they're talking about including or not including? I believe it's just more about including the actual picture of history versus just one version, from my understanding of it.
Right, and there was some concern about the new social studies standards, and I was actually talking to some teachers who are doing this, and not a single thing gets taken from the curriculum. They're not teaching what they have always taught. They're just including another perspective. So yes, they're still teaching about the Holocaust. They're still teaching about George Washington, this, that, the other thing. It's simply not the only view presented.
Thank you.
Mr. LaPlante?
Another question for the doctor. Did I understand or misunderstand when you said before that there is not such a thing as an individual personality? Could you explain that? Maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, I don't recall saying that.
You did.
Oh, intersectionality. Oh, yeah. People don't exist in a single category. You're not just a white person. You're a white person with a gender. Thank you for clarifying. Great question. Yeah, you don't exist in a single category. There are black people who have disabilities, who are LGBTQ. So we exist in multiple. That's a great question. Thank you for clarifying that.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Simon.
I'm sorry, who?
I'm Jennifer Simon.
Okay.
I just want to ask a question. What responsibility, if any, can be assigned to minority groups for deplorable social conditions and race relations? I think about the personal responsibility. It feels like that's very often so downplayed, is the personal responsibility of each individual. And Martin Luther King basically said that we look at their character. May every person be looked at with their character, and how important that is. And it really, to me, it really flies in the face of that. I was looking at individuals' character as being the most important thing. Definitely not race. Yes, those are terrible things. Racism has been around forever and ever, and it isn't going to go away. And we have to look at a different source. What is really the problem? It's something different than this, I believe.
Again, I'll focus on critical race theory as those 7 ideas, and I think it's important to look at that. People have asked me online about the Martin Luther King thing. Martin Luther King has written many thousands and thousands of pages, and to pull that one line as representing all of his incredible work and pull that out of context really isn't fair in getting to what he meant by that.
What did he mean by that?
I don't know. I'm going to let you interpret that.
Yes, sir.
My name is Dave Stanek. I'm from Walton. I've just got a quick question. Do you feel the media is helping pull the fire, or is it helping to reduce racism in the United States?
Just me?
Yep.
Oh. Again, I'm an expert on those 7 ideas. I don't want to. I'm not even an expert on those ideas.
We're talking in some of these comments, and everybody's great for giving their comments, but you're talking about how you see people and the prejudice and the bias and whatever. Isn't that what this is all about? Teaching our children the actual history, and maybe they will have more understanding than we do the different races.
Can we go up more than once? You can tell me if you want me to sit down. But my question to all of us is, does everybody here remember seeing the horrible pictures that we did see? Maybe not those specific ones, but I grew up in a little town in Wisconsin, and I learned how horrible racism was and how terrible slavery was. Is there anybody in this room that didn't learn that in school? Well, now, if Mr. or Professor Johnson's going to say he doesn't understand what's going on in the media, I have heard different explanations of that particular event. I am ignorant of it. I don't understand it. But from what I've heard, it isn't what was portrayed by President Biden. It wasn't what he said it was.
Were you there?
And I do have a question. You said, Professor Johnson, do I have that right, Johnson?
Yep.
Okay. You said just because we say it doesn't make it so. Well, you're telling us that this is not a Marxist thing. But when you look at the history, it is a Marxist thing. It did start with Marxism, with Marx. And I don't know a lot about this. I'm learning. But just because you say it doesn't make it not so.
Again, I didn't say I don't understand the media. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm focusing on those 7 ideas. And absolutely not. I can find nothing related to Marxism. That word equity, again, that's quite a stretch from equity to Marxism to socialism to communism. It does not exist. I'm sorry.
I have another comment. The lady up front said racism was terrible and slavery was terrible. It's not something that happens and the consequences don't go perpetuate generations after. And also say was, yet I married into a family who I didn't know at the time, but perpetuates racism openly over the dinner table, talking about sterilizing people of color, talking about how they were better off in slavery, telling me that white people are the best because the history books all say so. And then my husband, who says, no, I understand racism exists, but anybody who really wants to work hard at it can make it in this country. And while I believe that absolutely true, the barriers and challenges that my husband didn't even know about, and he had no idea, and still he doesn't know about a lot of because it was never taught him. Okay, I'm not telling you have to accept everything I believe, but I'm just questioning to grown up and been taught all your life. And he said, well, why should I question them? They worked so well for me. Because he has no idea. It worked out for him because who he is, you know.
I think we all also need to remember that slavery is still happening every single day here in the United States, across the world. So it wasn't a was thing, it is a current thing, and it's happening all across the spectrum. So it's important that we know that slavery isn't in our past, it's in our current situation, and it's in our future.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Johnson?
I went, could you just, I think a big controversy is this critical race theory, and it shouldn't be in our public schools, and we can't, and can you just distinguish between teaching the kids about critical race theory and using critical race theory to just drive the curriculum? Because that's in my head at least, two very separate things, and I think that gets confused.
It's confused, and I don't have exact clarity on this, but again, it's a theory, it's a way of looking at reality. And simply it says who's getting rewarded, who's not getting rewarded, who's get the resources, who doesn't get the resources. Look at history through this critical lens. That's what critical race theory is. And I think maybe the misunderstanding is critical race theory is teaching this or teaching that. It's a lens through which we look at reality.
I do have one question. The word race and critical race theory doesn't necessarily need to be there, or could it be called critical oppressive theory? Because it's, you know, about oppressing others, not just race, but like neurological and others.
That's beyond my pay grade, but race is an issue. It continues to be an issue, and we cannot help but see the effects of systemic racism. We just cannot help but see it.
Can you give some examples for everybody in the room as to systemic racism, what we would see in our everyday lives, maybe that we take advantage of, that is different for others?
Well, I grew up white. My college roommate grew up black in Chicago. And I was 10 yards ahead of him from the get-go, simply by what the barriers that I did not encounter. All right? And I'm going to stick in my lane, which is in education. And black males are disproportionately disciplined. For the same offense, they're disciplined harder. There's more school suspensions. There's more expulsion. There's the school to prison pipeline, which inordinately affects black males. That black and white students with the same special ed category, students of color are more apt to be sent to a special ed resource room, where white students are more apt to be in an inclusive classroom. Those are the kinds of systemic racism that are seen in education, and the bias of our testing situations. The SAT, it's common knowledge that that is culturally biased, but yet that is a gatekeeper to get into college. In education, we have this EdTPA that we use to evaluate teachers. And you do a review of the literature there, and people of color have trouble with it because of the cultural bias of that. It says you must teach like a white teacher teach in this certain way, this direct instruction. That's not necessarily like a white teacher, but this very teacher-centered direct instruction sort of approach. So those are just some in my lane, which is in education.
Lori, I believe you had a question?
It got answered, thank you.
Okay, good.
I waited long enough, it got answered.
Good. Yes? Mindy?
Mindy Kimmel from New Ulm. Hi, I just wanted to kind of add on to what you said there about some of that implicit bias and about how we experience race in our community. And I just want to talk about even things that we experience every day. You have a Band-Aid on your arm, and like, whose flesh is flesh tone Band-Aids? You know, who purchases nude colored fabric, and what color is that? It's not everyone's flesh tone, it's not everyone's skin tone, but I think looking at it through this lens allows us to be a little bit more critical of how we experience our privilege in the world based on what we have access to that represents our culture.
I have one kind of question, or to see if you have a recommendation. I did some bias training, and it was really eye-opening to me because bias isn't bad. Bias is something we all have. It's built into our upbringing. Do you have any recommendations for any place people could go just to, I've done that where they just go through and you kind
Harvard
of, yeah.
Implicit Association Test. Harvard Implicit Association Test. You have the black and the white faces, and you have to attribute a negative word and a positive word to each, and it measures the response time. Things that are associated more closely together in your neural networks, you're able to do that microseconds quicker. And I tried as hard as I could to be biased. But I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and all those jokes are in the back of my head someplace. All those stereotype movies of the 70s are in the back of my head someplace. And I think, my goodness, a police officer has to make a split-second decision. That is a tough thing if there's implicit bias there. It helps me understand.
If I remember correctly, you can do the Harvard implicit bias test without race having to do with anything. There are multiple tests you can do with disabilities, male, female. So if you don't necessarily want to take the test for race, but still want to see if you do have an implicit bias, there are many tests out there that you can take so it doesn't have anything to do with a race situation.
And millions of people have taken that test, so it's quite widely cited and validated.
I believe the one I did actually was on facial expressions, and can you interpret this person? It had nothing to do with race. It was just, can you interpret this facial expression, and then it gave you feedback. So it was very, very, very educational. I would encourage anybody to go out there and just try it.
Is that an online?
It's online, yeah.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? You could just step out a little bit, we could hear you a little bit better.
So something that came to mind when we talk about, somebody asked the question, can you give an actual example of what systemic racism might look like? And once again, I'm just using my family as an example here. So my mother-in-law, her grandparents came from Norway, and they came here and homesteaded in South. We're blessed with this piece of land, and they said you work land and it's yours within a certain amount. And my grandparents came here and they worked other people's land, right? And the amount they were making was not going to be enough to be able to buy land. And I'm so very grateful that the rancher that my mother was working for allowed him to stay in a home so that he wasn't having to pay. This was a farm home that so that was able to save enough to buy a home. Family members who otherwise the low pay, they were picking cherries, field work. It's not enough to have a home and raise a family here. But was able to help his own children buy homes who otherwise weren't able to because they were not able to get bank loans, use bank loans. And gain wealth from this land, and she still, even though the land leases it to farmers, and is gaining.
I have a question for you. So this, it sounds like somebody helped.
Could you go to the microphone, please, Gigi?
It sounds like somebody helped your family, right? Doesn't matter what shade of brown they were, but somebody helped your family. That's what we need to do. We need to, one by one, help the people in our lives. And I do have one more question for Professor Johnson. Why do Ben Carson, Herschel Walker, Candace Owens, a lot of significant people of dark, beautiful brown skin, why are they against critical race theory?
Point number 5, all people in a category do not think and act the same.
I just want to say that I'm very happy I do not covet, I do not envy anybody who has wealth. I think that pointing and just saying, well, you had this and you had that, and we can point all day as to what you had and didn't and what you did and didn't do. But I definitely agree that I don't think that's the whole point of teaching honest history. I think it's just I think it would, for my husband, would have created more compassion at the way he looks at people of color in this country. So that's just all I wanted to add.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
John Kluge, to the point of why do certain people advocate for certain issues, you have to look at where the money's coming from. And so many of the people who are opposing this, what they call critical race theory, are using it for other issues. Their main goal is to get people riled up so that they will come out and vote against the opposition. So they're mainly looking at it for their own power structure. And a lot of the folks that are funding this, you know, ALEC and some of the super rich or the wealthy, they have a definite interest in making sure that they continue to have enough people to keep anybody from raising their taxes or doing anything that would impact their financial well-being. So you have to look at where the money comes from and who's benefiting from whatever action is going on.
Thank you all for coming tonight. And thank you all for being so civil and respecting everybody else's opinion. We appreciate that. We hope that this presentation will start a dialogue among you and your friends to continue informing yourselves about the critical race theory and what it means and what it entails. So we're going to have to continue with the rest of our meeting. You're welcome to stay and attend, but we have other business to attend to in this meeting.
This is the fun part, guys. You want to stay for this part.
I'd like to thank Dr. Johnson for showing up tonight. We'll give the room a minute to clear before we begin.
Use that gavel.
Gavel.
We could probably just close the door.
Some of the speakers to please take their conversations outside, please.
I'll go shut the door.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Our first order of business is to approve the minutes from our May 24, 2021 meeting. The minutes have been presented. Is there a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes.
I'll second that motion.
Motion's been made and seconded to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. Motion passes. Item number 4 on a budget report. If you look at our financial report, you'll notice that our current standing, we have 97% of our budget left.
We're very fiscally responsible.
Yes. We did pay for the, if you notice, the expenses has been the Bavarian Blast Register and the fair booth registration for the Brown County Fair. So that we're both registered for. Those have been our 2 expenditures. Are there any questions on the budget report? Budget report does not require any action. We'll move ahead. Events Committee report, Bavarian Blast Parade. The registration has been submitted. Handouts are being ordered, and
we discussed whether or not we were going to do a float, and it was decided we were going to kind of do what had been done in previous years with a vehicle being driven and kind of carrying the stuff, and then the rest of us walking, handing stuff out.
I think in your report you mentioned something about T-shirts left over from last time.
There are multiple people that have the T-shirts still left. I think there are a couple of new ones possibly downstairs. I know that there are a couple of unused T-shirts that are available. So it's just getting the necessary logo to printwear.
Chad, do you have a T-shirt?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so it's just Kristen and Casey, the new members, I think?
Correct.
See if we could find those,
Yeah.
okay? Good. I'll try and check with Lisa later this week, and we'll go down and see what's downstairs. I know Lisa said we have some materials for the Brown County Fair booth downstairs, like banners and stuff like that, that we'll put up, so we're ready to do that. We do have an entry in the parade, and we'll need people to walk in the parade. Casey, do you want to, since you sent the report, do you want to kind of make sure everybody's reminded about that and where to meet?
Yep.
If you want to do that.
And I will create the Google Sheets so that people can sign up for their blocks of time for the fair booth.
For the fair booth, okay.
Just like we've done in years before.
Thank you, Jackie. Chad, you were using your vehicle, correct? Is that still the plan, or no?
I haven't really discussed
He wasn't
it
at the
yet,
mean, so we nominated him.
Okay, all right. You maybe talk to Casey and get that, okay. So we do have an entry there, we're covered, we're taken care of, and we will have some things to hand out.
Do you want me to get a hold of Printwear Graphics?
I did already, I did already with him, and he's gonna get back to me as far as the cost, yeah.
Okay, and the logo sizes he needs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Chair, do we have, I sent an email about inventory, just some stuff that I have. Were there things that we wanted to order as well? I thought stickers were a big hit for both of these summer events, actually 3 of them. I don't have it. We have tons of bookmarks. There's a few hundred, and then I got a bunch of signs as well.
I have a bunch of signs for the parade as well.
Okay.
So do I.
Okay.
So it seems like stickers and bookmarks are the things we need to order.
Or bookmarks we have, we can order stickers.
Okay.
Yep.
And then consider ordering the stickers that we don't have to individually cut, because.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Lesson.
Okay. And then following up on that, the Brown County Fair, if you notice, Jackie said she'll take care of the volunteer schedule. The registration form is submitted. We do have materials and handouts on that. Normally, we take turns, 2-hour stints with sitting in the booth and answering questions and having handouts. I think there are some brochures and other handouts we'll have in there. I'll talk to Lisa as far as some materials we can have from the city. If the city has anything as well we could put out.
I think normally with the booth, we have at least one person in the booth is from the HRC. I mean, you can have your spouse with you or whatever.
Right,
It doesn't always
correct.
have to be 2 HRC people.
But 2 people in the booth.
Yes.
At all times.
What are the dates for both of these?
It's on the
11th through 15th, I think it says on the agenda, if that makes sense.
All right.
Okay.
Yep. And July 18th for the parade.
Correct. Item number 5.3, the Human Rights Award for 2021. Lisa suggests that we consider changing the nomination deadline from September 30th, which we had set at our last meeting, to September 20th, so that the nominations could be reviewed at our 27th meeting, and then more to present it in October. Is that agreeable with everyone? I don't think we need a motion on that.
That sounds good.
Okay, so I will submit a note to the public, press release regarding that award for nominations. And there's a form which Lisa has, which will connect up with that. Education Committee report.
No report.
We have no need of that. We're working on getting a date for the September is our target, right? Early September, I think, on that.
September, we hope to have topics and more specifics for the poster and essay contest.
And the Greater Mankato Diversity Council community training is on hold. At first it was COVID, and then there was a change in the Greater Mankato Diversity Council leadership, so we'll have to negotiate that again to see how that works. Executive Committee report, we submitted a letter to the editor. You'll notice that we submitted that inviting the public to our session just recently, our prior session. The Executive Committee decided to send that in. Obviously, some of the information there was misinterpreted, but that's okay. I think obviously it got out to the public. We had a good turnout tonight. There is no Public Relations Committee report at present. Is anyone aware of any current human rights issues? Kristen, is your hand up?
No.
Okay.
Sorry. I'm just sitting here.
Oh, okay. No local. Typically, the current human rights issues, a year ago, we had a little problem with graffiti. That was one of the local things we had trouble with, just to give people an update with things we had. Dan, any legislative update?
I don't have any update on legislative action.
They've been worried about balancing the budget. City Council liaison?
Nothing to report.
Nothing to report, okay. Is there any other business? Okay. Then a reminder that our next meeting is July 26th at our normal time, 5:15. And a reminder to make sure we all show up on the 18th for our parade float.
You'll let us know where to meet then.
Yeah. Casey, you have everybody's email from the previous ones? Okay, good. All right. Good. That concludes our business for today. Yes, question from the audience?
As an ordinary citizen, let me commend the board, the commission for the public service they did for New Ulm.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for coming, showing some support. It's great.
I think we need to welcome our new mayor.
That's right.
Thank you for attending.
Thank you for attending, Mayor Sweeney. Yeah, good. And I saw our police chief come in as well. He's a normal member of our committee as well. Commission, shows up at our commission meetings. Are there any other comments from the crowd or anyone else?
I wonder if we consider, expanding on that. I mean, there's obviously interest and there's obviously a need, and I think it's just going to get to be more and more question that maybe we know, and maybe that falls to the education committee. But to decide how else now we can.
You mean a follow-up? A follow-up?
In the audience are educators or prior educators. Is there, you're not in the audience. What would you like to see? What would you like a speaker to come and talk about in regards to something like this? How can we better serve the community coming from possible teacher, on the outside?
We're scared of saying we want to support our students. We want them to feel safe in our school. We want to have training so that we can better serve our students. But we're scared about public backlash. We need support. We need to know that there are community members that support us every day in our lives to make all of our students feel welcome, safe, and loved.
Thank you.
Mrs. Custer?
some of those experiences here as a parent. And it's here.
So
I think we are aware of that as a commission, but that's a great idea to put them on a panel and have some kind of a moderation.
Well, and I think when we're,
Yeah, with help, I think that's a great
Yeah.
point. I would worry about, further victimizing them and traumatizing them, and so place for that to make sure that
and this was going to be a part of our partnership with the Mankato Area Diversity Council, and we had a program that was set up, and it was going to be community-based. It was going to start with, like, I can't remember even how-
Educators, religious personnel, and the police.
And the police.
Yeah.
And we were going to do education with them, then add more people, it was this whole big program we're going to do, and then COVID hit. So we never got it off the ground. We still have the funding
It's approved, yeah.
dedicated for that and approved for that. And then there was a change in the, just in the person who was helping us with it, moved to a different position. So it is something that we're working on. It would definitely be with the assistance and the guidance of the Mankato Area Diversity Council. The last thing I think we'd want to do is, put people in a vulnerable position. But they act as facilitators and have a really good program that they run with communities.
Teresa?
Another aspect for conversation, and Beatrice brought it up, racism in agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
In agriculture here who our farmers really did families who benefited not available, nor were many honest president in dropping in a servitude to African American help build the country. That has I was involved in the 90s work Africa. That the still exists today, less so. USDA is a big step trying to things, but in court because people have sued discrimination, including even with their own organization. I'd be happy to be to help on a bill that because it impacts so many people, including people who are trying to start in particular people of color.
Okay.
And maybe watch a truth, be careful what you wish for. Because I've seen horrible debates in New Ulm, surprisingly worse than anything I've seen in my organizing experience around a divisive issue. It shocked the heck
Mr. Custer?
I appreciate the young lady who spoke previously on behalf of the teacher. So I'm not going to put you on the spot by asking you this question. I'll simply pose it in general. What about the administration? Are they in position to support their teachers and things like this?
We did specifically invite a member of the school board who was here tonight, correct? Yes. So.
And I do know that our school board in New Ulm and the administrators are currently undergoing a diversity training. It's like once a month. So our superintendent is making a push for this. And
I believe on the welcoming committee too, right? is that what it's called? The
New Ulm, One New Ulm.
Yes, but I thought administration there was also a part of that, or it might just not be as administration, but as a person.
I just know that the administration, the superintendent, and all the board members, they're going through diversity training right now. The New Ulm Leadership and Education.
Is this something new?
I think they just had their first one, I believe, like a week or two ago. I don't know the details, but I know that they have had at least one of them.
I know
they're
just because my husband is on the school board, but I know that they're being very proactive.
Yes.
And their conversations are happening very much so. I mean, they're very aware and very proactive.
Weird.
And I think we're, just to say too, I think we're lucky here because like we have the school board that's proactive. Our our chief of police is working with us and being very proactive too and wants to be involved and having the police department involved with the diversity training. And I just think that we do have a really good base here too to start these conversations. I think they're going to be bumpy and we're going to have a lot of pushback, but I do think that we can't look past, we have to acknowledge too that I think we're maybe luckier than some communities as well.
The Human Rights Commission and
Yeah.
the New Ulm Police Department have a very, very close relationship, and we work very closely together in a great way. So we can have nothing bad, just the highest praise for the New Ulm Police Department and the actions that we have taken together.
That's a positive.
On that note.
Yes? Could you identify yourself?
Sarah Leslie. I'm on the leadership board for Heart of New Ulm, and we're always health equity.
I believe one of your presenters presented to us a few months ago at our meeting, yeah, on health equity.
You know, always keeping us in mind.
Okay. Thank you. Mrs. Costa, did you have a?
I just appreciate that I think getting this information into the schools is developed for I mean, I think the
Carefully taught, carefully taught. Has to be carefully taught.
and she said, I thought when I got and had it already and beautiful one. I mean, had that.
We are at our time limit. But I'd like to thank you all for staying and
Yes.
adding your expertise and comments. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. We are adjourned. Thank you all.
What was it?